The twilight sky over Montana burned like copper pennies scattered across velvet, and somewhere in that vast expanse, a melody drifted on the evening wind. It was a haunting tune, one that seemed to carry memories of distant lands and forgotten dreams, played by fingers that existed only in the realm of magic and mystery. The dust had settled thick on the mountain trail by the time Elena Vasquez appeared on the horizon, her silhouette wavering like a mirage against the dying light. She moved with the uneven gait of someone favoring an injured leg, each step deliberate and pained, yet determined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Cradled in her arms was something that defied explanation. A young doe with eyes like liquid amber, and strapped across her back, an accordion that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Tom Richardson had been checking the fence line of his cattle ranch when he first heard it, music floating across the prairie like smoke from a distant campfire. The melody was unlike anything he'd ever encountered, weaving through major and minor keys with an otherworldly sophistication that made his weathered hands pause in their work. He straightened slowly, removing his worn Stetson to better catch the sound, his gray eyes scanning the endless expanse of grassland and rocky outcroppings that marked the boundary of his property. At 45, Tom had lived through enough Montana winters and scorching summers to know that the land played tricks on a man's senses. Wind through canyon walls could sound like voices, and heat mirages could make a person see things that weren't there. But this music, this impossible, beautiful music that seemed to dance around him like living silk, was something else entirely. It spoke to a part of his soul that had been dormant for the 3 years since pneumonia took his wife Margaret, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the endless responsibility of keeping the Whispering Pine Ranch running. The melody grew stronger as Elena approached, though she herself made no movement to play the instrument on her back. The accordion's mother-of-pearl keys caught the last rays of sunlight, creating prisms of color that danced across the leather straps that held it secure. With each labored step she took, the music seemed to respond, growing more poignant, more urgent, as if the instrument itself understood the pain she carried in her injured leg and the desperate hope that drove her forward. Elena's dark hair had escaped from what had once been a neat braid, now hanging in waves around a face marked by exhaustion and determination. Her clothes, practical traveling garments of sturdy brown wool and leather, were dusty from days on the trail, and her boots showed the wear of someone who had walked much farther than originally intended. But it was her eyes that would have captured anyone's attention. Deep brown, almost black, filled with a mixture of wariness and wonder that spoke of recent trauma and carefully guarded secrets. The doe in her arms was no ordinary creature. Its coat held an unusual silver-white quality that seemed to shift and shimmer in the changing light, and unlike any wild animal Tom had ever encountered, it showed no fear of human contact. Instead, it nestled against Elena with complete trust, occasionally turning its head to gaze at the accordion with what could only be described as reverence. There were no visible injuries on the small deer, yet it made no attempt to escape Elena's gentle hold, as if it understood that their fates were somehow intertwined. As Elena drew closer to where Tom stood frozen by his fence post, the music from the accordion swelled to a crescendo that seemed to encompass the entire valley. The melody was complex, layering traditional folk harmonies with something that sounded almost celestial, as if angels themselves had contributed to the composition. Tom found himself holding his breath, afraid that any movement might break the spell and send this vision vanishing back into the realm of dreams and impossibilities. When Elena finally spotted him standing among his cattle, she stopped abruptly, and the music ceased as suddenly as if someone had closed the accordion's bellows. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the gentle lowing of cattle and the whisper of evening wind through the grassland. For a long moment, the two strangers regarded each other across the distance. He, a solitary rancher, marked by grief and hard work, and she, a mysterious traveler carrying impossible burdens and inexplicable magic. "Evening," Tom called out, his voice carrying easily across the space between them. Years of calling to cattle and horses had given him a voice that could project without seeming threatening, and he was careful to keep his tone neutral and welcoming. "You look like you could use some help." Elena shifted the doe slightly in her arms, wincing as the movement put weight on her injured leg. Her eyes darted from Tom to the sprawling ranch house visible in the distance. then to the cattle that had gathered curiously along the fence line, their large brown eyes reflecting the same wonder Tom felt at this unusual encounter. "I don't want to be any trouble," she replied, her voice carrying a slight accent that Tom couldn't quite place, something that suggested distant travels in foreign languages, though her English was perfect. "I was just passing through, heading toward the settlement I heard was about a day's ride north of here." Tom pushed his hat back on his head, studying her more carefully. The way she held herself spoke of someone accustomed to independence, but the slight tremor in her voice and the protective way she clutched the dough suggested vulnerability beneath the determined exterior. Most concerning was the obvious pain she was trying to hide, the way she kept most of her weight on her left leg, the occasional tightening around her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. "Settlement's called Cedar Falls," he said, moving slowly toward the gate in his fence, making sure his movements were non-threatening and deliberate. "But it's closer to 2 days on foot, especially if you're favoring that leg. And there's talk of storms moving in from the west. Wouldn't want to be caught in the open when they hit." The accordion on Elena's back seemed to shimmer in response to his words, though no music emerged from it. Tom noticed the way both Elena and the doe glanced at the instrument, as if checking on the condition of something precious and fragile. There was clearly more to the story than a simple traveler passing through. But Tom had learned over the years that pushing for information too quickly often resulted in people clamming up entirely. "I have some experience with storms," Elena said carefully, though Tom caught the way her eyes briefly clouded with what looked like painful memories. "But I appreciate the warning." As Tom reached the gate and began to unlatch it, several of his cattle moved closer, their curiosity apparently overcoming their usual wariness of strangers. What happened next made Tom question whether he might be having some sort of heat-induced hallucination. The doe in Elena's arms lifted its head and made a soft sound, not quite a bleat, more like a musical note, and the cattle responded with their own gentle lowing that seemed to harmonize perfectly with the deer's call. For just a moment, the barnyard symphony created something beautiful and impossible, a cross-species conversation that defied everything Tom thought he knew about animal behavior. Elena's face lit up with the first genuine smile Tom had seen from her, transforming her features from merely pretty to genuinely radiant. "Luna has always had a way with other animals," she explained, gently stroking the doe's silver coat. "I found her as an orphan fawn 3 months ago, and she's been my traveling companion ever since." "Luna," Tom repeated, finding that the name somehow fit perfectly with the mystical quality of the small deer. "And the music?" "That was coming from your accordion, but I didn't see you playing it." Elena's smile faded somewhat, replaced by a guarded expression that Tom recognized as the look of someone deciding how much truth to reveal to a stranger. Her fingers unconsciously reached back to touch one of the accordion's leather straps, a gesture that seemed both protective and reverent. "The accordion is special," she said finally, choosing her words with obvious care. "It belonged to my grandmother, and she always said it had a mind of its own. Sometimes it plays when the wind hits it just right, or when Luna and I have been walking for a long time and need encouragement to keep going." Tom had grown up on stories of strange happenings in the Montana wilderness, Native American legends of spirits in the mountains, tales of mysterious lights dancing over certain valleys, accounts of travelers finding help from sources that couldn't quite be explained. His practical rancher's mind wanted to dismiss the idea of a self-playing accordion as impossible, but his ears had heard what they'd heard, and his eyes had seen the instrument's ethereal glow. More importantly, his heart recognized something in Elena's guarded explanation that resonated with his own experience of loss and loneliness. Whether the accordion truly played itself or whether Elena was simply a remarkably skilled musician who preferred to maintain an air of mystery, the music had been beautiful, and the woman before him clearly needed help. "Well," he said, swinging the gate open wide, "special or not, it makes prettier music than anything I've heard in these parts for a long time, and Luna there seems like good company." He gestured toward his ranch house, where warm yellow light was beginning to glow in the windows as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. "Name's Tom Richardson, and this is Whispering Pine Ranch. Why don't you and your traveling companions rest here for the night? Tomorrow you can decide whether you want to continue on to Cedar Falls, or maybe stick around for a while." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena's eyes widened slightly at the invitation, And Tom could see her internal struggle, the desire for safety and rest warring with whatever had taught her to be cautious about accepting help from strangers. The doe in her arms seemed to sense her uncertainty, nuzzling gently against her cheek in what looked remarkably like encouragement. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Richardson," she said slowly, "but I don't want to impose. I don't have money to pay for lodging, and I'd hate to be a burden to someone who's already been generous enough to offer help to a stranger." Tom felt a familiar pang in his chest, the same protective instinct that had made him rescue injured animals over the years, the same impulse that had drawn him to Margaret when he'd found her stranded by a broken wagon wheel 15 years ago. There was something about Elena that reminded him not of his late wife specifically, but of the importance of human connection, of the way helping others had always made his own burdens feel lighter. "Luna there looks like she might be able to earn her keep," he said with a gentle smile, nodding toward the doe. "I've got a vegetable garden that's been having trouble with rabbits and other pests. If she's as good with animals as you say, maybe she could convince them to find their dinner elsewhere. And as for the music, well, it's been mighty quiet around here in the evenings. If that accordion of yours wants to play a tune or two, I'd consider that payment enough for a hot meal and a safe place to sleep." The offer hung in the air between them as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear. Tom could see Elena weighing her options, her injured leg obviously causing her increasing discomfort as the day's walking caught up with her. The practical part of her knew she needed rest and medical attention for whatever had caused her limp, but years of disappointment and betrayal had taught her to be wary of kindness that seemed too good to be true. It was Luna who made the decision for her. The doe turned her amber eyes toward the ranch house and made another of her musical sounds, this one clearly expressing approval and longing. As if responding to some invisible signal, the accordion on Elena's back began to emit a soft, barely audible melody, something that sounded like a lullaby mixed with a hymn of gratitude. "Luna seems to think we should accept your offer," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I have to admit, the thought of sleeping indoors and tending to this leg properly is more appealing than I'd like to admit." Tom felt a surge of satisfaction and something else, a sense of rightness, as if this unexpected encounter was somehow meant to happen. "Then let's get you folks settled in. I've got a guest room that doesn't get much use these days, and there's a small enclosed porch off the kitchen where Luna could sleep if she's comfortable being separated from you for the night. Otherwise, she's welcome in the house. I've shared my living space with plenty of animals over the years." As they walked slowly toward the ranch house, Elena's limp becoming more pronounced with each step, Tom found himself stealing glances at his unusual guests. The doe seemed to glow faintly in the starlight, and the accordion continued its barely audible melody, creating an atmosphere that felt both magical and peaceful. For the first time in 3 years, Whispering Pine Ranch felt less like a monument to loneliness, and more like a home where unexpected visitors might find exactly what they needed. The ranch house itself was a testament to Tom's practical nature and his late wife's eye for comfort. Built from local timber and stone, it sprawled across a small rise that provided excellent views of the surrounding valley. The wide front porch was lined with rocking chairs that Margaret had insisted on, claiming that any proper ranch house needed places for people to sit and watch the world go by. Tom had maintained everything exactly as she'd left it, partly from loyalty to her memory, and partly because changing things felt like admitting she was never coming back. Inside, the house retained Margaret's touches. Handmade quilts draped over comfortable furniture, shelves lined with books ranging from practical farming manuals to poetry collections, and photographs documenting their life together scattered throughout the rooms. Tom had worried that bringing Elena into this space might feel like a betrayal of his wife's memory, but as he lit the oil lamps and stirred up the fire in the stone fireplace, the house seemed to welcome its new guests with warm shadows and the promise of safety. "The guest room is just down the hall," Tom explained, leading Elena and Luna through the main living area. "It's got its own wash basin and clean linens, and there's a chair by the window where you can prop up that leg while you rest. I've got some salve that's good for muscle aches and injuries. Learned to make it from treating horses and cattle over the years, but it works just as well on people." Elena sank gratefully into one of Margaret's rocking chairs, finally allowing herself to show the full extent of her exhaustion. Luna settled beside her, the doe's presence clearly providing comfort that went beyond the physical. The accordion, now that they were indoors, had gone completely silent, though it continued to give off that subtle luminescence that made Tom wonder if he was imagining things, or if magic truly existed in the world. "I can't remember the last time I sat in a real chair," Elena admitted, closing her eyes briefly as the tension began to leave her shoulders. Luna and I have been traveling for almost 2 months now, mostly sleeping rough or in barns when we were lucky enough to find farmers willing to let us stay the night. Tom busied himself with preparing coffee and a simple meal, giving Elena space to rest while satisfying his curiosity about her story. 2 months of travel suggested she was running from something significant, but the care with which she treated Luna and the magical quality of her accordion suggested her flight might not be from legal troubles or personal debts. There was an air of tragedy about her, but also a strength that spoke of someone determined to survive whatever had driven her from her previous life. "Where did you start your journey?" he asked carefully, keeping his tone conversational rather than interrogating. 2 months is a long time to be on the road, especially with an injured leg and an unusual traveling companion. Elena opened her eyes and regarded him thoughtfully, clearly trying to decide how much of her story to share. Luna nuzzled her hand encouragingly, and after a moment, Elena began to speak in a voice that carried the weight of recent grief and hard-won wisdom. "I started in Colorado," she said, her fingers absently stroking Luna's soft coat. "I was living in a small mining town called Silver Creek, working as a music teacher for the children of the miners and their families. My grandmother had left me her accordion when she died, and I discovered I had a talent for music that brought joy to people who had very little of it in their lives." Tom poured coffee into 2 mugs, adding sugar to both and offering one to Elena before settling into the chair across from her. The story she was telling had the careful, rehearsed quality of something she'd had to explain before, but underneath it he could hear genuine emotion and pain. "Silver Creek was a rough place," Elena continued, accepting the coffee gratefully. "The mining company owned everything, the houses, the store, even the school where I taught. Most of the miners were good men trying to make an honest living, but there were others who saw a young woman living alone as an opportunity for trouble." Tom's jaw tightened as he began to understand the direction her story was heading. He'd seen enough of the world to know that isolated communities could be dangerous places for women without male relatives to protect them, and mining towns in particular attracted men who had left civilization behind, along with its constraints on behavior. "The mine foreman, a man named Hank Sullivan, decided that I should marry him," Elena said, her voice growing flat and emotionless in the way people spoke about traumatic events they'd learned to distance themselves from. "He made it clear that refusing his proposal would result in me losing my job and my housing and probably facing harassment from his friends and allies in the town." Luna made a soft sound of distress, as if the doe could sense Elena's emotional pain even through the careful control in her voice. The accordion, too, seemed to respond to her mood, its glow dimming slightly, as if sharing in the shadow that had fallen over her memories. "I tried to refuse politely at first," Elena continued, explaining that I wasn't ready for marriage and preferred to focus on my teaching. But Sullivan wasn't the kind of man who accepted refusal gracefully. He began making my life difficult, having the other teachers avoid me, convincing parents to keep their children away from my lessons, even going so far as to spread rumors about my character around town. Tom set down his coffee mug with more force than necessary, his hands clenching into fists as he imagined the systematic campaign of harassment Elena had endured. He'd known men like Sullivan, bullies who used their positions of power to force themselves on women who had no other options, men who saw kindness as weakness and independence as a challenge to be crushed. "The situation came to a head about 2.5 months ago," Elena said, her voice growing even quieter. "Sullivan cornered me after school one day, drunk and angry about something that had happened at the mine. He tried to force himself on me, and when I fought back, he became violent." Tom leaned forward, his protective instincts fully engaged now. "Did he hurt you badly?" Elena touched her right leg unconsciously, the same leg she'd been favoring during her walk to his ranch. "He threw me down some wooden steps leading from the schoolhouse. I hit my leg on a broken board, and the injury never healed properly because I had to leave town that same night. I was afraid that if I stayed, he'd either kill me or succeed in forcing me into marriage." The pieces of Elena's story were falling into place now, painting a picture of a woman who'd been driven from her home and livelihood by a violent man's obsession. Tom understood why she'd been cautious about accepting his offer of help. After what she'd experienced, trusting any man would require considerable courage. "So you took Luna and your grandmother's accordion and started walking," Tom said, his voice gentle with understanding. Luna found me that first night, Elena explained, a small smile returning to her features as she looked at the doe. I was camped in the woods outside Silver Creek, crying and trying to figure out where to go and how to survive without any money or resources. She just appeared out of the darkness, this beautiful creature that seemed to understand I needed companionship more than anything else. As if responding to her words, Luna stood and moved closer to Elena's chair, resting her head on the armrest in a gesture of pure affection. The accordion's glow brightened slightly, and Tom could swear he heard the faintest whisper of melody, as if the instrument was acknowledging the bond between woman and deer. "And the music?" Tom asked, fascinated despite himself by the mystical elements of Elena's story. Elena hesitated, then seemed to make a decision to trust him with the full truth. "My grandmother always claimed that the accordion was enchanted, that it had been blessed by street musicians in Prague who believed music could heal hearts and change destinies. I used to think those were just stories she told to make the instrument seem more special than it really was." She reached back to touch one of the accordion's straps, and immediately a soft, complex melody began to emanate from the instrument. Not loud enough to be intrusive, but beautiful enough to make Tom's breath catch in his throat. But the night I fled Silver Creek, when I was at my lowest point and didn't know if I had the strength to keep going, the accordion began to play by itself. It played songs of courage and hope, melodies that reminded me of my grandmother's love and strength. And it's been playing ever since, always seeming to know exactly what Luna and I need to hear. Tom sat back in his chair, processing everything Elena had told him. The rational part of his mind insisted that there had to be a logical explanation for the accordion's behavior. Wind patterns, temperature changes, something that created the illusion of self-generated music. But the larger part of him, the part that had lived close to the land for 45 years and had witnessed countless small miracles in nature, was willing to accept that some things couldn't be explained by science alone. More importantly, Elena's story had awakened something in him that had been dormant since Margaret's death, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival, a reminder that helping others was one of the most meaningful things a person could do with their life. This wounded, magical woman and her enchanted companions had stumbled into his world at exactly the moment when he needed to remember that isolation wasn't the only response to grief. "Well," he said finally, raising his coffee mug in a small toast. "Whether your accordion is enchanted or just has excellent timing, I'm grateful it guided you to my ranch. It's been too quiet around here for too long, and I have a feeling that Luna and her musical friend are going to fit in just fine at Whispering Pine." Elena's eyes filled with tears, the first she'd allowed herself to shed in front of him, and she raised her own mug to meet his toast. "Thank you, Tom. I don't know what Luna and I would have done if we hadn't found you tonight." Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the valley, with the promise of the storms Tom had predicted. But inside the ranch house, warmed by firelight and the unexpected comfort of human connection, Elena felt safer than she had in months. The accordion played a gentle lullaby as the evening deepened, and for the first time since fleeing Silver Creek, she allowed herself to hope that her long journey might finally be leading toward something better than mere survival. As Tom prepared the guest room and Elena settled Luna on the enclosed porch with blankets and fresh water, both of them sensed that this night marked the beginning of something significant. Neither could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead, the pursuit that would follow Elena from Colorado, the tests that would prove the strength of their growing bond, or the magic that would transform not just their individual lives, but the entire community of Cedar Falls. But as they said goodnight and retired to their separate rooms, the accordion's music continuing softly throughout the house like a blessing and a promise, Tom and Elena both slept more peacefully than they had in months. Tomorrow would bring new questions and decisions, but tonight they had found something precious in each other's company, the beginning of trust, the possibility of love, and the hope that even the most broken hearts could heal when given the right combination of time, kindness, and a little bit of magic. The last thing Tom heard before sleep claimed him was Luna's musical call from the porch, answered by the gentle lowing of his cattle in the distance, and beneath it all, the accordion's endless melody weaving dreams of second chances and new beginnings through the Montana night. Dawn crept across the Montana valleys like honey poured over rough granite, painting the world in shades of amber and rose that seemed to breathe life into the sleeping landscape. Elena woke to the sound of Luna's gentle movement on the enclosed porch, accompanied by what she initially thought was birdsong until she realized the accordion was greeting the morning with a melody so soft it barely disturbed the air around it. The guest room felt like a sanctuary she hadn't known she needed. Clean sheets that smelled of lavender and mountain air, a window that framed the distant peaks like a painting, and, most importantly, the deep silence that came from being truly safe for the first time in months. Her injured leg, propped on pillows as Tom had suggested, felt better than it had since the night she fled Silver Creek, though the deep ache that had become her constant companion remained, as a reminder of how far she'd traveled and how much she'd left behind. Elena dressed carefully in the same travel-worn clothes she'd been living in for weeks, though she took time to braid her dark hair properly and wash her face with the clean water Tom had left in the ceramic basin. Through the window, she could see him moving between the barn and the main corral, tending to morning chores with the efficient movements of someone who'd been following the same routine for years. There was something comforting about watching him work, something that spoke of stability and reliability in a world that had become unpredictable and dangerous. When she emerged from the guest room, the accordion's morning song grew slightly louder, as if welcoming her into the day. Luna appeared at the kitchen door, tail wagging like a dog rather than flicking like the wild deer she'd once been, and Elena felt a smile tug at her lips, despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. Whatever else happened, these past hours of rest and safety had been a gift she hadn't expected to receive. The kitchen held the lingering warmth of a fire that had been carefully banked through the night, and Elena discovered that Tom had left coffee prepared along with fresh bread, butter, and preserves arranged on the wooden table. A note written in careful script read simply, "Help yourself to whatever you need. Back from chores around 8, Tom." The gesture was so thoughtful, so considerate of her need to ease into the day without pressure or awkwardness, that Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. She was buttering a second piece of bread when Tom's boots sounded on the front porch, followed by his quiet entry into the house. He'd removed his hat and jacket, and Elena noticed that his graying hair was damp with morning dew and honest sweat. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into bright sunlight, but those same eyes held a kindness that made her feel instantly at ease. "Morning," he said, his voice carrying the slight roughness of someone who spent more time talking to animals than people. "Hope you found everything you needed." Luna seems to have made herself comfortable, and I notice she's already figured out where the vegetable garden is. Found her having what looked like a serious conversation with my tomato plants. Elena laughed, a sound that surprised them both with its genuine warmth. She has very strong opinions about gardens. In Silver Creek, she somehow convinced the mice to leave my small herb patch alone just by sitting near it and staring at them. I've never seen anything like it. Tom poured himself coffee and settled into the chair across from her, the same arrangement they'd shared the night before, but now with the easy familiarity that sometimes developed between people who'd been honest with each other about important things. "Speaking of Silver Creek," he said carefully, "I've been thinking about what you told me last night. About Sullivan and the situation you left behind." Elena's hand tightened around her coffee mug, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "What about it?" Men like that don't usually give up easily, especially when their pride's been damaged. Have you considered the possibility that he might try to follow you or send someone to look for you? The question Elena had been trying not to think about for 2 months settled between them like a cold stone. She'd allowed herself to hope that the distance and time would be enough, that a man like Sullivan would eventually find another target for his obsessions and forget about the music teacher who'd humiliated him by refusing his advances and escaping his control. "I've tried not to think about it," she admitted quietly. "But yes, the possibility has kept me awake more nights than I'd like to admit. Sullivan has connections with other mining operations throughout Colorado and Wyoming. If he wanted to find me badly enough, he could probably manage it." Tom nodded grimly, his expression suggesting he'd expected this answer. "Then staying in Cedar Falls might not be the safest option for you. It's the kind of place where strangers stand out, and if someone came asking questions about a woman traveling with a tame deer and a musical instrument, people would remember." Elena felt her heart sink, even as she recognized the wisdom in his words. She'd begun to allow herself to imagine settling in Cedar Falls, perhaps finding work as a music teacher again, creating a new life built on the foundation of safety and community. The thought of continuing to run, of never being able to stop looking over her shoulder, filled her with a weariness that went bone deep. "So what would you suggest?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite the fear growing in her chest. Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if seeking answers in its dark depths. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly, as if he was working through the implications even as he offered them. "Stay here," he said simply. "At Whispering Pine, not as a guest, but as someone who belongs here, someone who has a reason to be here that goes beyond running from trouble." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Tom's weathered cheeks colored slightly, but his gaze remained steady. "I mean that a ranch this size is more work than one person can handle properly, especially as I get older. Margaret used to help with the books, the correspondence with buyers, the 100 small tasks that keep a place like this running smoothly. Since she died, I've been letting things slide, focusing only on the bare minimum needed to keep the cattle fed and the bills paid." He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that Elena recognized as nervousness. "What I'm suggesting is a business arrangement, primarily. You could handle the administrative side of the ranch, help with the domestic tasks, maybe even start offering music lessons to the children in the area. In exchange, you'd have a permanent home, safety, and a legitimate reason to be here that has nothing to do with your past." Elena stared at him, trying to process an offer that seemed too good to be true. "You'd be willing to do that for someone you've known for less than 24 hours? "I'd be doing it for someone who's proven herself to be honest, hardworking, and in need of help," Tom replied firmly. "And for someone whose music has already brought more life to this place than it's seen in 3 years." As if summoned by his words, the accordion began to play a complex melody that seemed to weave together themes of gratitude, hope, and new beginnings. Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes as the music seemed to express everything she was feeling but couldn't put into words. "There's something else to consider," Tom continued, his voice growing more serious. "A business arrangement might not be enough protection if Sullivan does come looking for you. Men like him don't always respect legal boundaries, especially when they're dealing with what they see as their property." Elena's stomach clenched at the implication. "What are you suggesting?" Tom's face flushed deeper, but his voice remained steady. "I'm suggesting that if you're comfortable with the idea, we could present ourselves as more than business partners. As a married couple, it would give you legal protections you don't have as a single woman, and it would provide a completely believable explanation for your presence here." The offer hung in the air between them like morning mist, beautiful and insubstantial and full of possibilities that Elena hardly dared to examine. Marriage as protection, as a shield against the demons of her past, was something she'd never considered. But marriage to this kind, steady man who'd already shown her more respect and consideration than Sullivan ever had was an entirely different proposition. "You would do that?" she whispered. "Enter into a marriage of convenience with a woman you barely know, just to help her escape from a dangerous situation?" Tom's smile was gentle and slightly sad. "Elena, I've been alone in this house for 3 years, going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. In one evening, you and Luna and that magical accordion of yours have reminded me what it feels like to have purpose beyond mere survival. If helping you means I get to keep that feeling, then yes, I'd be honored to offer you my name and whatever protection it can provide." Elena closed her eyes, letting the accordion's music wash over her as she tried to think clearly about an offer that could change everything. The practical part of her mind cataloged the advantages: safety, stability, a legitimate place in the community, the chance to use her skills in music and administration to contribute to something meaningful. But beneath the practical considerations, something deeper was stirring, something that recognized Tom Richardson as fundamentally different from the men who'd tried to control and diminish her. "What about love?" she asked quietly, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "What about the possibility that someday you might want to marry someone you actually care about romantically?" Tom's expression grew thoughtful, and Elena could see him weighing his words carefully. "I loved Margaret with everything I had," he said finally. "She was the center of my world, and when she died, I thought that part of my life was over forever. I'm not looking for someone to replace her, Elena, but I'm not opposed to the idea that caring and respect might grow into something deeper over time, if that's what both people wanted." The honesty in his voice, the acknowledgement that love couldn't be forced or manufactured but might be allowed to develop naturally, spoke to something in Elena that had been damaged by Sullivan's crude demands and violent possessiveness. Here was a man offering partnership without coercion, protection without price, the space to become whatever they might be together, without pressure or expectations. "And if it doesn't?" she asked. "If we find that we're better as friends and business partners than as anything romantic, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Tom replied pragmatically. "The West is full of arrangements that started as convenience and grew into genuine partnerships. What matters is that you're safe, that you have a home, and that we're both honest with each other about what we're feeling and what we need." Luna chose that moment to wander into the kitchen, moving directly to Elena's side and resting her elegant head on her knee. The doe's amber eyes seemed to hold wisdom beyond her years, and Elena found herself thinking of all the times Luna had appeared at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right kind of comfort. "What do you think, Luna?" Elena asked softly, stroking the deer's silver coat. "Should we stay and build something new here?" Luna made her musical sound, the one that seemed to communicate approval and encouragement, and the accordion's melody swelled in response, creating a harmony that filled the kitchen with something that felt remarkably like blessing. Elena felt the last of her resistance crumble, replaced by a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, her long flight from Silver Creek had been leading her toward this moment all along. "Yes," she said, the word emerging stronger and more certain than she'd expected. "Yes, I'd like to stay. I'd like to try building something here with you, whatever that something turns out to be." Tom's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, warm and full of promise. "Then we'd better start making plans. If we're going to do this, we should do it properly, in a way that gives you the strongest possible legal protection and the most believable story for anyone who might come asking questions." They spent the rest of the morning discussing practical details with the thoroughness of people who understood that their safety might depend on getting the small things right. Tom would ride into Cedar Falls that afternoon to speak with Reverend Matthews about performing a marriage ceremony and to visit the county clerk's office to ensure all the legal documentation was properly filed. Elena would use the time to familiarize herself with the ranch's books and correspondence, beginning the process of understanding her new role as partner rather than guest. "There's one more thing we should consider," Tom said as they finalized their plans. "Names. Elena Vasquez is the name Sullivan would be looking for. As my wife, you'd be Elena Richardson, which might provide some additional protection, but if someone specifically described you and Luna, people would still make the connection." Elena had considered this problem during her months of travel, but had never found a solution that felt both safe and honest. "What would you suggest?" "Well, Elena could be short for several different names, Helena for instance, or Magdalena. And Vasquez isn't the only Spanish surname that starts with V. What was your grandmother's maiden name?" Elena thought back to the stories her grandmother had told about her youth in Prague, before she'd immigrated to America and married a man named Vasquez who'd given Elena's family their surname. "Valdez," she said slowly. "Her name was Helena Valdez before she married my grandfather." "Helena Valdez Richardson," Tom said, testing the sound of it. "Different enough from Elena Vasquez that casual inquiry might not make the connection, but close enough to your real identity that you won't have trouble remembering it or feeling comfortable using it." The name felt strange on Elena's tongue when she tried it, but also somehow right, as if she was reclaiming a part of her heritage that had been lost over the years. Helena Valdez Richardson suggested a woman with roots and connections, someone who belonged somewhere rather than someone who was running from something. "Helena it is," she agreed, feeling as if she was taking the final step in a transformation that had begun the moment she'd fled Silver Creek with Luna and her grandmother's accordion. That afternoon, while Tom rode to Cedar Falls to make arrangements, Elena immersed herself in the practical details of ranch management. The account books told a story of steady income from cattle sales and modest expenses, but also revealed the gradual neglect Tom had mentioned. Correspondence had gone unanswered, opportunities for better prices had been missed, and the small details that distinguished a thriving operation from a surviving one had been allowed to slide. She found herself genuinely excited by the challenge of bringing order and efficiency to the ranch's business affairs. Her education had included mathematics and bookkeeping, skills that had served her well as a music teacher, managing her own small income and expenses. Applied to an operation the size of Whispering Pine, those same skills could make a significant difference in both profitability and quality of life. Luna spent the afternoon exploring her new domain, somehow managing to communicate with the ranch's various animals in ways that created harmony rather than chaos. Elena watched through the kitchen window as the doe appeared to negotiate a peaceful coexistence with the chickens, established boundaries with the cattle that left both species content, and even seemed to reach some kind of understanding with Tom's old dog, a gentle retriever named Sam who had been Margaret's particular companion. The accordion played intermittently throughout the day, its music providing a soundtrack to Elena's new life that ranged from industrious working songs during her time with the books to peaceful lullabies during the quiet afternoon hours. Each melody seemed perfectly suited to the moment, as if the instrument truly did possess the kind of wisdom her grandmother had claimed. As evening approached, Elena found herself growing nervous about Tom's return. The rational part of her mind insisted that their arrangement made perfect sense, that it offered solutions to problems that had seemed insurmountable just days before. But another part of her worried about the speed with which her life was changing, about the trust she was placing in a man she'd known for such a short time, about the possibility that she was trading one form of dependence for another. Her worries proved groundless when Tom returned, just as the sun was setting, his face bright with success and something that looked remarkably like genuine happiness. "Reverend Matthews can perform the ceremony tomorrow evening," he announced, hanging his hat on the peg by the door and moving to wash his hands at the kitchen basin. "He's a good man, discreet about people's personal business and more interested in helping folks than in asking uncomfortable questions." Elena felt her heart rate quicken at the reality of marriage being less than 24 hours away. But Tom's calm confidence helped steady her nerves. "What did you tell him about our situation?" "The truth, mostly. That you're a woman in need of protection from a dangerous situation back in Colorado, that we've found we work well together, and that we're both interested in building something meaningful here at the ranch." Tom's eyes were warm as he looked at her. He said he's married plenty of couples over the years who started with less and built more, and that he'd be honored to help us get started on the right foot. "And the legal documentation?" "All arranged. The marriage certificate will be filed with the county clerk on Monday, which means by next week, Elena Vasquez Richardson will officially exist in all the records that matter." Tom paused, studying her expression carefully. "How are you feeling about all this? Any second thoughts or concerns we should talk through?" Elena considered the question seriously, taking stock of her emotions and finding them surprisingly clear. Yes, she was nervous about the changes ahead, but underneath the nervousness was a deep sense of rightness, a feeling that she was finally moving towards something positive, rather than simply away from something terrible. "I'm scared," she admitted honestly, "but I'm also more hopeful than I've been in a very long time. This feels like the beginning of something good, Tom. Something real and solid and worth building." His smile was answer enough, but he voiced his agreement anyway. "Then let's build it together, starting tomorrow." They spent the evening in comfortable companionship, discussing plans for the ranch's future, sharing stories from their respective pasts, and listening to the accordion's gentle music as it wove itself around their conversation like a blessing. Luna settled at Elena's feet, apparently content with her new home, while Sam claimed his usual spot by Tom's chair, and for the first time since Margaret's death, the ranch house felt like a home where people actually lived rather than merely existed. When they finally said goodnight and retired to their separate rooms, Elena felt a peace she hadn't experienced since childhood. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and the final step in her transformation from Elena Vasquez, fugitive music teacher, to Elena Richardson, ranch partner and protected wife. But tonight, surrounded by safety and kindness and the promise of belonging somewhere, she allowed herself to believe that the worst part of her journey was finally over. The accordion played her to sleep with a lullaby that sounded like home, and Elena's dreams were full of music and mountain sunrises, and the steady presence of a man who'd offered her everything she needed without asking for anything she wasn't ready to give. Tomorrow would be her wedding day, the beginning of a new life built on trust and hope rather than fear and desperation. And for the first time in months, Elena Vasquez looked forward to tomorrow with joy rather than dread. Morning brought with it a flurry of preparations that kept Elena too busy to worry about the magnitude of what she was about to do. Tom had arranged for Mrs. Catherine Wells, a neighboring rancher's wife and apparently the closest thing Cedar Falls had to a social coordinator, to come help Elena prepare for the ceremony. She arrived mid-morning with an armload of supplies and a warm smile that immediately put Elena at ease. "Tom Richardson is one of the finest men in this territory," Catherine announced, as she bustled around the guest room, laying out options for Elena's wedding attire. "Margaret was my dearest friend, and I know she'd be pleased to see him finding happiness again with someone who clearly makes him smile the way you do." Elena felt a flutter of anxiety at the mention of Tom's late wife, wondering if people would see her as an interloper trying to replace someone irreplaceable. But Catherine seemed to sense her concern and addressed it directly. "Now don't you go worrying about living up to Margaret's memory," the older woman said firmly. "That sweet girl would be the first to tell you that love isn't a finite resource, and that Tom deserves to be happy again. You're not replacing her, honey, you're just becoming the next chapter in his story. That's how life works for those of us lucky enough to get more than one chance at contentment." The dress Catherine had brought was a simple but elegant blue silk that had belonged to her own daughter, altered quickly to fit Elena's slighter frame. It was the kind of dress that spoke of respectability and quiet beauty, perfect for a woman beginning a new life with dignity and grace. As Catherine helped her with the final touches to her appearance, braiding ribbons through her dark hair and lending her a pair of pearl earrings that had been in the Wells family for generations, Elena felt herself transforming from a refugee into a bride. "There," Catherine said finally, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "You look absolutely lovely, dear. Tom's going to forget how to speak when he sees you." Elena studied herself in the small mirror, hardly recognizing the composed, radiant woman looking back at her. The months of travel and hardship had left their mark, but they'd also given her a strength and determination that showed in her eyes and the set of her shoulders. She looked like someone who'd survived difficult things and emerged stronger for the experience, someone ready to embrace new possibilities with both wisdom and courage. The ceremony took place in the ranch house's main room, which Tom and Sam had spent the day decorating with wildflowers and candles that created an atmosphere both festive and intimate. Reverend Matthews proved to be exactly the kind of minister Elena had hoped for, kind, thoughtful, and focused on the commitment the couple was making rather than the circumstances that had brought them together. "Marriage," he said in his opening remarks, "is both the most practical and the most mystical of human institutions. It's about shared work and shared dreams, about choosing to face whatever comes with someone whose presence makes you stronger than you could be alone." As they exchanged vows, Elena found herself meaning every word she spoke. The promises to love, honor, and cherish felt not like empty formalities, but like genuine commitments to the man standing beside her, holding her hands with such gentle strength. When Tom spoke his vows, his voice rough with emotion, Elena felt something shift in her heart, a door opening to possibilities she'd thought were closed to her forever. The accordion played throughout the ceremony, its music providing a soundtrack that seemed to lift their words and transform them into something approaching prayer. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, the instrument's melody soared into something triumphant and joyful, and even the skeptical part of Elena's mind had to admit that it felt remarkably like a blessing from forces beyond the ordinary world. Tom's kiss was gentle and reverent, the kiss of a man who understood that true intimacy was built over time rather than claimed in a moment. But beneath the restraint, Elena sensed warmth and genuine affection, the foundation on which deeper feelings might grow if they were allowed to develop naturally. The celebration that followed was simple but heartfelt, with Catherine and her husband joining Reverend Matthews for dinner and conversation that lasted well into the evening. Elena found herself relaxing completely for the first time in months, laughing at James Wells's stories about his early days ranching, discussing music and teaching with Catherine, and watching Tom interact with their guests with the easy confidence of a man genuinely happy with his life. Luna, wearing a fresh blue ribbon for the occasion, held court on the porch with Sam and several of the ranch cats, apparently explaining to them the new social dynamics of their household. The sight of the doe surrounded by domestic animals, all of them peaceful and content, struck Elena as a perfect metaphor for what she hoped to create in her new life. A place where different creatures could find harmony despite their varying natures and backgrounds. As their guests prepared to leave, Catherine pulled Elena aside for a private word. "I want you to know that you have friends here," she said warmly. "Whatever brought you to Tom's door, you're part of our community now, and we take care of our own. If you ever need anything at all, you just send word to the Wells Ranch and we'll come running." The offer of friendship and support from someone who barely knew her moved Elena deeply. After months of isolation and wariness, The idea of belonging to a community again felt almost too good to be true. "Thank you," she whispered, embracing the older woman impulsively. "You don't know how much that means to me." "I think I do, honey," Catherine replied knowingly. "We've all got chapters in our stories we'd rather not discuss, but what matters is how those chapters end. Yours is ending with Tom Richardson and a new beginning, and that's all anyone needs to know." After their guests departed, Elena and Tom found themselves alone together for the first time as husband and wife. The weight of that new reality settled between them. Not uncomfortable exactly, but significant enough to make them both slightly self-conscious about how to proceed. "I want you to know," Tom said carefully as they cleaned up the remains of their wedding dinner, "that nothing has to change about our sleeping arrangements or our personal boundaries unless and until you want it to. This marriage is real in every legal sense, but the private aspects of it can develop at whatever pace feels right to both of us." Elena felt a rush of gratitude for his consideration, for his understanding that trust and intimacy couldn't be commanded but only given freely. "I appreciate that more than I can say. I care about you already, Tom, more than I expected to so quickly, but you're right that some things need time to grow naturally." They settled into their evening routine with the easy cooperation of people who'd found a comfortable rhythm together. Elena tended to Luna and secured the chickens for the night, while Tom banked the fires and checked the locks, domestic tasks that felt both ordinary and precious in their very ordinariness. When they finally said goodnight and retired to their separate rooms, Elena carried with her the knowledge that she was no longer Elena Vasquez, fugitive and victim, but Helena Richardson, wife and partner and woman with a future worth protecting. The accordion played her to sleep with a melody that sounded like contentment, and her dreams were filled with images of the life she and Tom might build together if given enough time and grace. But even as she slept peacefully in her new home, protected by her new name and her new husband's strength, forces were already in motion that would test everything they'd built together. In Silver Creek, Colorado, Hank Sullivan was reading a letter from one of his contacts in Wyoming, a letter that mentioned a woman matching Elena's description who'd been seen in the company of a rancher named Richardson. And in his twisted mind, plans were already forming for retrieving what he considered his property, regardless of the legal barriers that now protected her. The music that had guided Elena to safety was about to face its greatest challenge, and the love that was just beginning to bloom between Tom and Helena Richardson would soon be tested by the darkness Elena thought she'd left behind forever. But for now, in the quiet peace of Whispering Pine Ranch, all was well, and the accordion's gentle melodies promised that whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together. 3 weeks had passed since Helena Richardson first heard her new name spoken aloud at her wedding ceremony, and the autumn air carried the scent of changing seasons across Whispering Pine Ranch. The aspen trees painted golden streaks across the mountainsides, and the cattle moved slower in the crisp mornings, their breath forming small clouds in the chilled air. Helena had settled into her role as Tom's wife and business partner with a naturalness that surprised them both, managing correspondence with buyers, organizing the ranch's finances, and even beginning to offer music lessons to children from neighboring homesteads. The accordion had become a fixture of their evening routine, playing gentle melodies while Helena worked on mending or correspondence, and Tom carved new fence posts by lamplight. Luna had claimed dominion over the vegetable garden, somehow maintaining perfect order among plants and animals alike with her mysterious communications. The doe's presence had transformed the ranch into something resembling a peaceable kingdom, where predators and prey seemed to coexist under her benevolent supervision. Helena was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she first noticed the dust cloud on the eastern horizon. It was too early in the day for neighbors making social calls, and too late in the season for cattle drives passing through. Something about the purposeful nature of the approaching riders made her stomach clench with familiar anxiety, though she tried to tell herself it could be anything from traveling merchants to circuit judges making their rounds. Tom emerged from the barn where he'd been shoeing one of the horses, wiping his hands on a rag and squinting toward the distant figures. "Expecting anyone today?" he asked, his tone casual but his posture already shifting into something more alert and protective. "No," Helena replied, unconsciously moving closer to where Luna grazed peacefully among the last of the season's tomatoes. "But perhaps it's just someone needing directions or supplies." They both knew it wasn't, even before the riders came close enough to make out individual faces. There was something in the way the lead horseman sat his saddle, something in the determined pace of the group's approach, that spoke of men on a mission rather than travelers seeking hospitality. Helena felt the blood drain from her face as recognition struck her like a physical blow. Hank Sullivan rode at the front of the group, looking exactly as she remembered him from her nightmares, broad-shouldered and imposing, with cold eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw in terms of potential conquest or obstacle. Behind him rode 3 other men she didn't recognize, all wearing the hard expressions of individuals accustomed to violence and comfortable with intimidation. "Helena," Tom said quietly, using her new name with deliberate emphasis, "go inside and stay there. Take Luna with you." But Helena found herself unable to move, frozen by the sight of the man who'd haunted her dreams and driven her from the only home she'd known. Sullivan's gaze swept over the ranch with the calculating assessment of someone evaluating property he intended to claim, and when his eyes finally settled on her, his smile was cold and possessive. "Well, well," Sullivan called out as his group reached the yard and reined in their horses. "Elena Vasquez, playing house with a new man. Did you really think you could hide from me in this god-forsaken wilderness?" Tom stepped forward, positioning himself between Helena and the mounted men with calm determination. "You're on my property, mister, and you're not welcome here. I suggest you turn around and head back the way you came." Sullivan's laugh was harsh and humorless. "Your property? That's interesting, considering you're harboring stolen goods that belong to me." His eyes never left Helena's face as he spoke. "That woman owes me a debt, Richardson. She broke a legal contract and stole valuable property when she ran away from Silver Creek. I'm here to collect what's mine." "My wife doesn't owe you anything," Tom replied steadily, his hand moving casually toward the rifle propped against the porch railing. "And the only property around here belongs to me and her jointly, according to the marriage certificate filed with the county clerk 3 weeks ago." The word wife hit Sullivan like a slap, his face darkening with rage and disbelief. "Wife? You married that lying little thief? She's already legally bound to me, Richardson. That marriage is a fraud, and I have every right to take her back to Colorado to face charges." Helena finally found her voice, though it came out shakier than she would have liked. "I was never legally bound to you, Hank. A proposal is not a marriage contract, no matter how much you threatened me to try to make me accept it." "You accepted my offer," Sullivan snarled, dismounting from his horse with threatening deliberation. "You accepted my protection and my support, and you owe me compensation for the humiliation you caused when you ran away like a coward in the night." "I accepted nothing," Helena replied, surprising herself with the steadiness that crept into her voice as anger began to override fear. "I repeatedly refused your advances, and when you tried to force yourself on me, I defended myself and left to avoid further violence." Tom's grip on his rifle tightened, though he kept the weapon pointed toward the ground in a gesture of controlled readiness rather than open aggression. "You heard her. She's made her position clear, and she's under my protection now. I'm asking you one more time to leave my property peacefully." Sullivan's 3 companions had spread out slightly, taking positions that would allow them to surround Tom and Helena if the situation escalated to violence. The lead rider among them, a thin man with a scar across his left cheek, rested his hand on the grip of his sidearm with practiced casualness. "I don't think you understand the situation here, Richardson," Sullivan said, his voice dropping to the low, dangerous tone Helena remembered from their final confrontation in Silver Creek. "I've got legal papers stating that Elena Vasquez is wanted for theft and breach of contract. Your marriage to her doesn't change the fact that she's a criminal who needs to answer for her crimes." "Then you can present those papers to the territorial marshal when he makes his next circuit through Cedar Falls," Tom replied calmly. "Until then, my wife stays right here where she belongs." As if responding to the rising tension, Luna emerged from the garden and moved to stand beside Helena, her presence somehow both comforting and significant. The doe's amber eyes fixed on Sullivan with an intensity that seemed to unnerve him, and Helena felt the familiar tingle that preceded the accordion's music. The instrument began to play softly, its melody weaving through the charged atmosphere like morning mist through pine trees. The music was unlike anything Helena had heard from it before. Not the gentle lullabies or working songs that had become familiar, but something that seemed to pulse with protective power and ancient wisdom. Sullivan's horse began to prance nervously, rolling its eyes and shying away from the ranch house as if sensing something the humans couldn't perceive. The other men's mounts showed similar agitation, and Helena noticed that the ranch's cattle had moved closer to the homestead, forming a loose circle around the buildings as if drawn by some invisible force. "What the hell is that noise?" Sullivan demanded, his composure beginning to crack as the accordion's music grew stronger and more complex. "My grandmother's accordion," Helena said, her fear beginning to transform into something resembling confidence. She always said it could sense danger and respond accordingly. The music swelled, and suddenly the yard was filled with animals, not just the ranch's domestic creatures, but wild ones as well. Deer emerged from the tree line, coyotes padded down from the hills, and even a magnificent elk appeared at the edge of the clearing, all of them facing Sullivan and his men with calm, unwavering attention. "This is some kind of trick," Sullivan growled, but Helena could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Some frontier nonsense designed to spook city folk." Tom allowed himself a small smile. "The animals around here have always been protective of their territory. Seems like they don't much care for uninvited guests." One of Sullivan's men, a nervous-looking fellow with twitching hands, leaned forward in his saddle. "Boss, maybe we should come back with more men, or with the marshal like he suggested. This place feels wrong somehow." "Shut up, Morrison," Sullivan snapped. "It's just animals and parlor tricks. Elena, you're coming with me right now, or I'll have Richardson arrested as an accessory to theft." But even as he spoke, his authority was crumbling. His horse continued to fight the bit, trying to turn away from the ranch buildings, and the circle of watching animals seemed to grow larger and more attentive by the moment. The accordion's music had become something that seemed to vibrate in the bones, and Helena realized that she was no longer afraid. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Hank," she said clearly, moving to stand beside Tom with Luna flanking her other side. "This is my home now, and these are my people. You have no power over me here." Sullivan's face contorted with rage, and his hand moved toward his weapon. But before he could draw it, the accordion's music exploded into something that was part symphony, part battle cry, and part force of nature unleashed. Every animal in the clearing, domestic and wild alike, took a single step forward in perfect unison, creating a wall of living creatures between Sullivan and his intended victims. The effect on Sullivan's men was immediate and decisive. Morrison's horse reared and bolted, carrying its rider back toward the trail in panicked flight. The other two men struggled to control their mounts as the animal's terror infected them, with the urgent need to escape whatever power had been awakened at Whispering Pine Ranch. Sullivan himself found his horse turning in circles, fighting every attempt to guide it closer to the house. "This isn't over, Elena," he shouted over the crescendo of music and the restless sounds of dozens of animals. "I'll be back with the law, and I'll have you dragged back to Silver Creek in chains if necessary." "No," Helena replied, her voice carrying clearly across the chaos. "You won't." She stepped forward, and Luna moved with her, the doe's silver coat seeming to glow in the afternoon sunlight. "You see, Hank, I was never your property to claim. I was never yours to control or punish or drag anywhere against my will. I am Helena Richardson now, a married woman with a home and a community that protects its own." The accordion's music shifted again, becoming something that sounded like justice made audible, like the voice of every woman who'd ever stood up to a man who thought he owned her. Sullivan's horse finally succeeded in its desperate attempts to flee, carrying its cursing rider toward the trail with the other survivors of his defeated expedition. As the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, the extraordinary gathering of animals began to disperse as peacefully as they'd assembled. The cattle wandered back to their grazing, the wild deer melted back into the forest, and even the magnificent elk turned and disappeared into the aspens with regal dignity. Helena stood in the sudden quiet, her heart pounding but her spirits soaring with the realization that she was truly free. Tom's arm came around her shoulders, solid and warm and reassuring, and Luna pressed against her side with contented satisfaction. "Well," Tom said finally, his voice filled with wonder and admiration, "I guess that settles that." Helena laughed, the sound bubbling up from some deep well of joy and relief she'd thought was permanently dried up. "I can't believe it actually worked. I mean, I hoped the accordion might provide some kind of protection, but I never imagined anything like that." "Your grandmother was right about it being special," Tom observed, looking toward the instrument where it rested against the porch railing, now silent but somehow still radiating a sense of satisfied accomplishment. "But I think it was responding to more than just magic. It was responding to you, to your strength and your refusal to be intimidated." Helena considered this, recognizing the truth in his words. The accordion had always played most powerfully when her emotions were strongest, when she needed courage or comfort or hope. Today, when she needed to stand up to the man who'd terrorized her, it had given her exactly the support she required. "So what happens now?" she asked, leaning into Tom's embrace and feeling truly safe for the first time since Sullivan had first set his sights on her. "Now we get back to building our life together," Tom replied simply. "Sullivan's been publicly humiliated and run off by what he'll probably describe as frontier witchcraft. He's not likely to risk his reputation trying to explain what happened here, and even if he does come back with legal authority, we've got witnesses who will testify that he was the aggressor and you were defending yourself." Helena nodded, understanding that her ordeal was truly over. She was Helena Richardson now, wife and partner and woman with roots that went deep enough to weather any storm. The music that had guided her to this place had also given her the strength to defend it, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with Tom beside her and Luna at her side. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, the accordion played a gentle melody that spoke of endings and beginnings, of journeys completed and new adventures just beginning to unfold. Helena's fingers found Tom's in the gathering twilight, and she realized that love, like music, couldn't be forced or demanded, but only allowed to grow in its own time and way. "Thank you," she said quietly, meaning it for everything. The shelter, the protection, the patience, the chance to become who she was meant to be. "Thank you," Tom replied, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her hand, "for bringing music and life back to this place. For reminding me that the best things are worth waiting for and worth protecting." Luna settled at their feet with a contented sigh, and somewhere in the distance, a nightingale began to sing, adding its voice to the accordion's gentle song. Helena Richardson closed her eyes and listened to the music of her new life, knowing that she had finally found the place where she belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.